She was bartered away for a debt that was never hers, then driven out into the killing cold of the Wyoming high country to be forgotten. But when a half-frozen mail-order bride stumbles into the cabin of a dying mountain man and pulls a bullet from his side with her own seamstress needle, her one act of mercy lights a fuse beneath every man who ever sold her cheap and sets the whole frontier ablaze. The Union Pacific locomotive shrieked and shuddered to a halt at Hollow Pine Station, Wyoming Territory. It was the merciless January of 1875, and the wind, knifing down off the Medicine Bow Peaks, carried no welcome for Miss Adeline Caro. She stepped onto the frost-bitten platform, clutching a single worn carpetbag, her thin gray coat, no match for a cold that did not bite so much as press, a silent weight that reached straight through to settle in her bones like a second skeleton made of ice. She was 22, a parson's orphaned daughter from the green hills of Ohio, and until 11 weeks ago, a seamstress mending the hems of women who would not look at her twice. She had no family left. The lung fever had taken her father the winter she turned 16, and her mother 3 springs after, leaving her nothing but a Bible, a good name, and a pair of clever hands. So when a gentle letter came from a homesteader named Elias Good, who rode of 40 acres and a milk cow and a quiet life under big skies, Adeline let herself believe the long loneliness might be ending. She sewed herself a wedding dress in secret, plain cream muslin with mother-of-pearl buttons she could not really afford, and boarded the train west with her whole frail hope folded up small inside her. But the man waiting on the platform was not the man from the letters. There was no Elias Good. There never had been. The figure shuffling toward her through the steam was a lean, sallow creature with a wet, sliding smile and eyes that crawled over her like she was a side of beef hung in a window. "You'd be the Caro girl," he said, and it was not a question. "I'm Mordecai Vane. The letters was my notion. Good's a name I made up off a flour sack." He laughed, a thin, wheezing laugh. "There's a gentleman waiting on you, and he don't like to be kept." Adeline drew herself straight the way her mother had taught her. "I am betrothed to a Mr. Elias Good," she said. "There has been some terrible mistake, and I would thank you to take me to him." "There ain't no mistake, missy. You're paid for. You're spoke for. Now walk." He led her not to any homestead, but down the frozen main street to the swinging doors of the Silver Garter Saloon, where the lamps burned yellow and the air came out hot and sour with whiskey and unwashed men. Mordecai steered her through the staring faces to a corner table where a man sat waiting like a spider at the center of a web. He was a different creature entirely, tall, clean, immaculately dressed in a black frock coat and snowy linen, his smiling face the face of a man accustomed to being liked. He rose and bowed as though she were a duchess. "Miss Caro, Cyrus Devane at your service. Please sit. You must be half perished from that train." Adeline did not sit. "Mr. Devane, I have been brought here against my will under a false name. I demand to know what is going on." Devane spread his clean hands with vast, oily patience. "Of course. The truth is a simple business matter. Your late father, the good parson, owed money to interests I represent, a loan taken against a parcel of land in this territory. With the interest compounded, that debt now stands at $400. Your father is dead. The debt is not. It passes to his only heir." His gaze settled on her like a hand laid flat against her throat. "You!" "That is a lie," Adeline whispered. My father never owned a foot of land in his life, nor borrowed a penny he could not pay back the same week. I would know. Would you? The smile never wavered. I have the paper, signed and witnessed. A court would find it most persuasive. But a woman has other ways of settling a debt out here, where men are many and wives are scarce. Mr. Vane has advanced me a portion of your worth. The rest you will earn, one way. His eyes flicked slowly toward the stairs that led up to the rooms above. Or another. The whole filthy shape of it landed on her at once. To these men, she was not a woman at all. She was currency, a debt with hair and eyes, and the long, careful years of keeping her name clean counted for exactly nothing in the corner of the silver garter. But Adeline Carroll had buried both her parents and gone on living, and somewhere under the fear a hot, bright thread of fury pulled taut. She lifted her chin. "I am a human being," she said, and her voice did not shake. "Not a sack of flour to be traded across a table by a swindler and his lapdog. I will not earn 1 penny of a debt I do not owe. Take me to a magistrate, sir, or go to the devil, but you shall not have me." For one heartbeat Devane's smile slipped, and underneath it she saw the thing he truly was, cold and flat and patient as a coiled snake. Then the smile came back, and it was worse for coming back. Spirited, he murmured, "I do admire spirit. It breaks so beautifully." He nodded to Mordecai. "Take her up to the line camp on the Calder Road and let the cold reason with her a spell. A night in the snow teaches a proud woman the value of a kind offer. If she freezes," he shrugged, reaching for his glass, "well." The frontier swallows debts, too. What Cyrus Devane did not know was that he had just made the gravest mistake of his comfortable, smiling life. For he was about to drive Adeline Carroll straight up the one mountain no man in Hollow Pine dared climb, into the shadow of the single living soul in all the territory who had a reason of his own to make Cyrus Devane bleed. They put her in the back of an open buckboard and drove her up out of the valley as the last gray light died. Mordecai Vane handled the reins, a jug of corn liquor between his knees, and beside Adeline sat a hired man with a scattergun who would not meet her eyes. The road climbed and narrowed until it was little more than a pale scar winding up through black walls of pine. And the snow began to come down in earnest. They reached the line camp near midnight, if you could call it a camp, a roofless shell of a cabin abandoned years ago and left to the weather. Mordecai hauled her down by the arm and shoved her toward it. Devane says a night in the cold. He wheezed, breathing whiskey in her face. But Devane ain't here, is he? A body could freeze stiff out here, and who's to say it weren't an accident? Be a sight friendlier, you was. Might be I'd let you ride back down warm. Adeline answered him with the heel of her boot brought down hard on the arch of his foot, and when he yelped and bent she tore free and ran into the snow, into the black trees, into the howling teeth of the storm. Behind her Mordecai shouted, and the hired man's gun went off once into the dark, the crack swallowed instantly by the white. Then she heard nothing but the wind and her own ragged breath, and she ran until the camp was gone, and the world was nothing but cold and dark and the endless fall of the snow. She did not know how long she walked. Time came apart in the storm. The snow rose over her ankles, then her knees, and each step was a separate act of will. Her thin boots filled, and her feet went from aching to burning to a terrible absence of feeling. She fell and rose and fell again, and the third time she did not rise so quickly. A great treacherous warmth had begun to steal over her, the shivering gone, and in its place a heavy golden drowsiness, sweet as sleep. Some dim part of her mind knew this warmth for the lie that it was, the cold's last cruelty, death wearing the mask of comfort. And she was so very tired. She sank to her knees at the foot of a great dark pine, certain she would die there 22 years old, and no one in all the world would mark the place. And it was then, as her eyes slid closed, that she caught it, faint and impossible, drifting down through the storm. Wood smoke. The smell cut through the killing drowsiness like a slap. Where there was wood smoke there was a fire, and a roof, and a chance of life. Adeline forced her frozen legs back under her and climbed toward that thread of smoke as though it were the last rope in the world, crawling on her elbows when her legs would no longer answer. And at last the trees opened, and she saw it. A low, sturdy log cabin set against the mountainside, one amber square of lamplight glowing like a fallen star. She made it as far as the door, struck the planks twice with a numb hand, and pitched forward as the world went out like a snuffed candle. When she came back to herself, it was to firelight and the muzzle of a rifle 6 inches from her face. She lay on a buffalo robe before a roaring stone hearth, the heat agony in her thawing hands. But it was the man crouched over her that held her frozen, holding a long lever-action rifle steady as a stone wall, the muzzle aimed between her eyes. He was the largest man she had ever seen, broad as a barn door. Long dark hair hung loose and wild, tangled with a heavy black beard shot through with gray, and a pale scar ran from his left temple down into it. His bare chest was mapped with old silvered scars beneath a fur half-cloak, and his eyes stopped her breath, pale gray, the color of river ice, utterly without warmth. "You'll tell me who sent you," he said, his voice low and rough as gravel, "and you'll tell me true. I've buried men on this mountain for less than knocking on my door past midnight. No one sent me," Adeline rasped. "I ran. There were men. They left me to freeze. I saw your fire. I am sorry I had nowhere else." The pale eyes searched her for the lie. "Devane's men," he said. It was not a question. "You came up the Calder Road. There's only one outfit drives women up that road in the dead of winter. You know him," she breathed. "You know Cyrus Devane." His jaw tightened until the muscles stood out beneath the beard. He did not lower the rifle, but he did not fire it. For a long moment he simply looked at her ruined boots and her hands, blistered and bleeding from clawing up the mountain. Hands that had clearly never been let near a weapon, and by some hard reckoning of his own, he eased the hammer down and set the rifle aside, just out of her reach. "I know Cyrus Devane," he said grimly, rising to tower over her. "And there ain't a soul that man ever touched he didn't ruin. Drink this." He pressed a tin cup of scalding chicory coffee into her shaking hands. "Slow, name's Thaddeus Moore. Down in that pit of a town they call me the Ghost of Hollow Pine, on account of they figure I'm half a haunt and best left be." They figured right about the second part. "Adeline Carroll," she whispered. And then, because the warmth and the simple fact of being alive had cracked something open, she began to weep, not from fear of him, but from the sheer unbearable mercy of a fire and a roof when she had lain down to die. Thaddeus watched her, a man unaccustomed to tears. At last he reached out, awkward as a bear handling an egg, and dropped a heavy wool blanket around her shoulders. "Ain't what I pictured when somebody come pounding on my door," he muttered. "But you'll do. Sleep, girl. Nothing on this mountain gets past me to you tonight." And though she had every reason to fear the giant-scarred stranger, Adeline believed him, and turned her burning hands to the fire and slept. She woke to gray daylight and the smell of frying salt pork. The cabin was small and spare and scrupulously clean, pelts curing along one wall, traps arranged with military neatness on pegs. Thaddeus Moore stood at the hearth with his broad back to her, and he had pulled a faded red Henley over the bare, scarred chest. "Storms broke," he said without turning. "We got maybe a day before the next one. Eat." He set a tin plate beside her and went back to the fire. He did not sit with her. He moved about his small kingdom with a careful, deliberate distance. A man who had not shared his roof in a very long time and did not quite remember how. He was not a talker, but he was not cruel, and over that snowbound day Edelin came to understand that the menace the town read in him was mostly the menace of a man left alone so long he had forgotten how to be otherwise. He had a wolfhound, a great shaggy gray beast named Sergeant, who had lost an ear somewhere and took to Adeline at once, laying his heavy head in her lap as if she had always belonged there. Late that afternoon, as Thaddeus hauled in an armload of wood, she saw him stagger and saw the dark, wet stain spread low across the left side of his Henley. He had been shot days ago. The wound had gone bad, and he had meant to ride it out alone, the way he rode out everything alone. She understood with a cold lurch that the great frightening man had been slowly dying on his feet the whole time he was nursing her back to life. "You are wounded," she said, rising. "Sit down and let me see it." "It's nothing. Bullet from a claim jumper. It'll keep." "It will not keep. It is festering, and if you do not let me clean it, you will be dead by spring. I am a seamstress, Mr. Moore. I have stitched 10,000 seams. I can stitch one more. Now sit." And the ghost of Hollow Pine, who had buried men for knocking on his door, looked at this small, fierce woman with her sleeves already pushed back, and to his own astonishment, he sat. She heated water and threaded her own slim steel needle, the one tool of her trade she had not lost in the snow. She cut away the bloodied shirt, a medical thing and nothing else, the wound ugly and swollen with the ball still buried in the meat of him. She poured whiskey into it, and he gripped the table until the wood creaked, but he did not cry out. With the point of his skinning knife, she worked the flattened ball free and dropped it ringing into the cup. Then, with the clever hands that had mended 1,000 torn hems for ungrateful women, she sewed the ghost of Hollow Pine back together, small, even stitches, neat as any seam she had ever set. "There," she breathed, tying off the catgut. "I have mended finer cloth than you, Miss Moore, and worse. You will live." He looked down at the neat row of stitches, then up at her face, and something had changed behind the river ice of his eyes. The ice had not melted, but it had cracked, deep down where the water still runs. "5 years I've been up on this mountain," he said slowly, "and not one soul has done me a kindness without wanting 3 back. You pulled lead out of a stranger that had a gun in your face 6 hours past. I don't understand you." "You do not have to understand me," Adeline said gently. "You have only to hold still and heal." That night, snowed in deep and warm by the fire with Sergeant snoring between them, the words finally came, slow and hard, the way water comes from a pump long unused. Thaddeus Moore told her who he had been before he was a ghost, a Union scout through 4 long years of war who had seen more killing than any man was meant to carry and still walk upright. He had come west after, found a wife, a gentle dark-haired woman named Ruth, and built a little place in the Calder Bottoms, happy for 2 short years as he had never believed a man like him could be. And then Cyrus Devane had come. He weren't called Devane then, Thaddeus said, staring into the fire. He was Pinkerton, hired gun for the Silver Syndicate that wanted the whole Calder Valley for the lodes under it. They bought the law. They burned out the holdouts. My Ruth, she wouldn't sign the deed over. Stood in our own doorway and told his men no, same as you told them no in that saloon. His big hands closed slowly into fists. They set the house afire with her inside it. The law called it an accident. He bought himself a new name and a fine coat and a seat at the head of the table in Hollow Pine, and I come up this mountain to die slow. He turned those pale eyes on her, and there was something in them now, almost gentle and far more dangerous than the rifle had been. I have waited 5 years for a reason to come back down and finish him. And then a girl he tried to freeze to death comes crawling to my door. Adeline sat very still, and then, because he had given her his truth, she gave him hers, the false letters. The invented homestead, the $400 that was never her father's debt, and then she reached for the thin gray coat drying by the fire and felt along the hem where, all her life, a seamstress keeps her secret sewn. There was a stiffness there, a packet, hidden in the lining by hands other than her own. She picked the stitches out with her needle and drew forth a folded square of oiled paper and opened it by the firelight. It was a deed, a silver claim deed to a parcel in the Calder Valley called the Bonanza Lude, signed in the name of her father the parson, dated the year before he died. He did own land, she whispered, her hands trembling. Devane did not lie about that. He only lied about the debt. My father must have grub-staked some prospector and never known its worth, and Devane has spent these years hunting the heir who holds the paper so he can take it clean. That is why they did not simply throw me in the snow in town. They needed me alive long enough to sign it over. She looked up. This claim sits in the heart of his valley. He has killed for less. He will move heaven and earth to put me in the ground now. Thaddeus was quiet a long moment. Then he reached out and closed his enormous scarred hand very gently over both of hers, and his rough voice went low and certain as bedrock. Then heaven and earth had best look to themselves. Listen to me, Adeline Carroll. You are under my protection now, not for the claim, not for the deed, not for anything that paper's worth. For you. I let one woman stand alone in a doorway, and I have buried that for 5 years. I will not bury 2. As long as there is breath in me, no man living puts a hand on you again. I swear it on Ruth's grave. You are not alone any more. We never look back from here. And Adeline Carroll, who had not been promised a true thing by a single soul in 11 long weeks, looked into the cracked ice of his eyes and believed him with her whole heart. Then we go on together, she said, and leaned forward, slow and certain, and pressed a single soft kiss to his weathered cheek, light as a moth, and felt the great frightening man go utterly still, as though no one had touched him kindly in 100 years. Outside, far down the slope, a single twig snapped under a careful boot, and Sergeant lifted his ragged head and began, very low, to growl. Thaddeus moved before the growl had left the dog's throat, up off the floor, despite the fresh stitches in his side, the lever action already in his hands. He doused the lamp and pulled Adeline below the window. Stay low, behind the stone. Don't move from it. He eased the shutter open a finger's width, and what he saw turned his face to granite. Far down the white slope, strung out among the black pines, a line of torches burned, 20 and more, climbing slow and patient toward the cabin. Devane had not waited for the cold to do his work. When his line camp turned up empty, he had reasoned out the one place a freezing woman could have gone, and brought every gun in Hollow Pine up the Calder Road to settle two debts at once, the girl who held his claim and the ghost who had haunted his sleep. They aimed to burn us out, Thaddeus said quietly, same as they done Ruth. He can't let either one of us walk down off this mountain alive. He pressed something cold and heavy into her hands. This is a Colt 45, 6 in the cylinder. You point it with both hands and squeeze, slow, like setting a careful stitch, and lock your elbows. It kicks hard. I am not asking you to be brave, Adeline. I am telling you that you are not useless, and they will learn it tonight. The first shot splintered the shutter where his head had been. Then the night came apart in fire and noise. Lead hammered the log walls and screamed off the stone hearth, and Thaddeus moved from window to window in the dark like the haunt the town named him. And each time the lever action spoke, a torch fell guttering into the snow. But he was outnumbered 10-1, and the smell of coal oil was already creeping under the door as men crawled close to fire the walls. "The wall catch? We can't hold the cabin," he shouted over the din. "There's an old workin' behind the rock face, the Calder Run mine, played out years ago. One way in, one way to defend. We make for it now while the dog draws their eyes." He whistled low, and Sergeant streaked out the front in a snarling gray blur, and the guns of the gang swung that way for one precious instant. In that instant Thaddeus kicked out the back shutter, threw Adeline through it into the snow, and came after her, firing as they ran for the black mouth of the old mine. They made it inside as the cabin bloomed into orange flame behind them, the dry logs catching all at once. Thaddeus pulled her deep into the timbered dark past rotted ore carts and stopped, breathing hard. A hand pressed to his side where the stitches had torn, and the dark stain spread anew. "You are bleeding again. Been bleeding a while. Don't signify." He reloaded by feel, thumbing fresh brass into the rifle. "Listen now." The old crew left blasting powder in a side drift and a coil of fuse. The roof of this adit is bad, rotted props near to falling on their own. A man sets a charge under those props at the mouth and lights it. He brings the whole front of this mountain down on whoever stands in it. But somebody has to hold the mouth while the charge is set. "Then you set the charge," Adeline said, "and I will hold the mouth. Girl, there's 20 men out there, and one of you bleeding, and one of me with 6 bullets and a steady hand. You have just told me which job needs the strength to carry powder and which needs the steady hand. I did not climb a mountain to die to be carried out of this one. Go, Thaddeus, I will buy you the time." She had already moved to the mouth of the adit, kneeling behind a stout, fallen prop, the Colt braced across it in both hands, the way he had shown her. For one heartbeat the ghost of Hollow Pine looked at the small, fierce woman with a gun too big for her hands, and something crossed his ruined face very near to wonder. Then he went, swallowed into the black of the mine, and Adeline turned to face the firelight and the coming men alone. They came, as he had said, dark shapes against the burning cabin, slipping toward the mine mouth. Certain the trapped quarry had nowhere left to run. The first man she let come close enough to see the sneer on his face in the orange light, and then she squeezed the trigger, slow, like setting a careful stitch. The Colt bucked and roared and threw her shoulder back, and the man folded into the snow and lay still. The rest scattered for cover, and she made them pay for every yard, 2 more falling before the cylinder ran dry. She did not weep, she did not freeze. She reloaded with shaking fingers from the loose brass, in her apron pocket and held the mouth of the mine like a closed door. But there were too many. A shot caught the prop by her face and stung her cheek with splinters. Another laid a hot line across her arm, and she knew she could not hold much longer. And it was then that the smiling voice came drifting out of the dark, smooth and unbearably calm. Miss Carroll, you have given a fine accounting of yourself, but you are bleeding and nearly out of bullets, and your ghost has left you to die in a hole. Come out now, bring me the deed, and I give you my word as a gentleman you will not be harmed. A pause, and then the snake beneath the silk. Or stay, and burn like the last fool woman who told me no in a doorway. And from the deep dark behind her came Thaddeus Moore's gravel voice, very quiet. Charge is set. Fuse is laid. Come back to me now, Adeline Slow, on my word we run, no matter what you hear behind us. She came. She slipped back into the dark, and his big hand found her shoulder and drew her in. But even as he struck the match, even as the small flame hissed to life at the end of the fuse, a torch flared at the mine mouth, and Mordecai Vane lurched into the adit ahead of the others. Drawn by the smell of the kill, his scattergun swinging up toward the light of the match. There, Mordecai shrieked. "They're in here, boss, both of." Thaddeus shoved Adeline behind him and took the charge of the scattergun meant for them both. The blast caught him across the shoulder and flung him back against the timber, and he went down hard, the rifle clattering away into the dark. Mordecai cackled and broke the gun to reload, and behind him Cyrus Devane stepped into the mine mouth at last, immaculate even now, a long Pinkerton revolver in his clean-gloved hand, and leveled it down at the fallen giant with the mild distaste of a man swatting a fly he had been meaning to swat for years. 5 years you have hidden up here, ghost, Devane said softly, thumbing back the hammer. And it ends in a hole, with me taking the woman and the deed both. Did you truly believe a broken scout and a seamstress would be the ones to— He never finished it. For Cyrus Devane had made, for the second time, the gravest error of his smiling life. He had forgotten the woman. He had looked past her as men like him always looked past her, as a thing already accounted for, already owned, already beaten. And in the flickering torchlight, Adeline Carroll rose up from behind the fallen body of the man who had sworn to protect her, lifted the Colt in both her steady hands, braced her elbows the way he had taught her, and looked down the long barrel at the smiling man who had burned one woman in a doorway and tried to freeze another in the snow. "You should not have looked away from me, Mr. Devane," she said. Her voice did not shake, her hands did not shake. Her eyes in the torchlight were the color of cold iron. "I am not a debt, I am not a deed. I am the woman you left to die, and I am still here." She squeezed the trigger, slow, like setting the last careful stitch in a long seam. The Colt roared in the close stone throat of the mine. The shot took Cyrus Devane high in the shoulder of his gun arm and spun him round and dropped him, the Pinkerton revolver skittering away across the rock, and the smooth, patient confidence went out of his face all at once and forever, replaced by the wide, white astonishment of a man who has finally met the one accounting he cannot buy his way out of. Mordecai Vane took one look at his fallen master, and at the steady gun swinging toward him next, dropped his scattergun and fled shrieking into the night. And in that same moment, down at the foot of the mountain, a long line of riders appeared on the Calder Road with a lantern at their head, and a voice came rolling up through the cold dark, hard and official as a courtroom door. "This is United States Marshal Hollis Beck." throw down your arms in the name of the law. For weeks, Beck had been building a case against the Hollow Pine Silver Syndicate, needing only one honest witness and one true paper to bring the whole rotten edifice down, and the gunfire had brought him up the road at a gallop with a dozen deputies behind. Devane's hired guns, leaderless and surrounded, threw down their weapons rather than hang for a wounded man's vengeance. It was over. But Adeline did not see the lanterns. Not yet. She had dropped the Colt and fallen to her knees beside Thaddeus Moore, pressing her hands against the wound in his shoulder, telling him fiercely that he would not die. You swore on Ruth's grave no man would put a hand on me. She wept. Well, no man has. I am whole. You kept your word. Now you keep yourself. Breathe, Thaddeus Moore, and look at me. We never look back. We only go on. You told me so. And the ghost of Hollow Pine, who had wanted to die for 5 long years, opened his pale river ice eyes, found the face of the woman who had given him a reason to live, and breathed. He did not die. It was Adeline's needle again, by the marshal's lantern light, that closed the worst of him, and her stubborn nursing through the long tale of that winter that brought him back, fever by fever, until the river ice eyes learned, slowly, to warm. Cyrus Devane lived to stand before a federal judge. The deed sewn into a parson's daughter's coat, the bonanza lewd he had murdered and forged to possess, became the very paper that hanged his empire. Marshal Hollisback laid the forged debts and the burned homesteads and the testimony of a wronged seamstress before the court at Cheyenne, and the smiling man who had bought a name and a fine coat was stripped of all three and led away in irons, there to learn at last the value of a cold room and a closed door. Mordecai Vane, who fled into the blizzard that night, was never seen in Hollow Pine again. The frontier had swallowed the coward whole. And then the snow began to go, the way it always goes in that high country, all at once and grudging, the great drifts giving way to black earth, and then, impossibly, to green. The Calder Valley, that had been a white waste filled up with running water and wild blue commas and the loud, glad business of returning birds. And on a bright morning in May, on the very ground where a gentle, dark-haired woman had once stood in a doorway and said no, Thaddeus Moore and Adeline Carroll were married beneath an open sky, with Marshal Beck for a witness and a one-eared wolfhound for a guest of honor. She wore a dress of plain cream muslin she had sewn a second time, with mother-of-pearl buttons she could now well afford, for the bonanza lewd was hers, and it was rich. With the silver they raised a true house on the Calder bottoms where the burned one had stood, and Thaddeus Moore came down off his mountain for good. No longer a ghost, but a husband, and the town that had called him a haunt learned to call him neighbor. On their wedding evening he pulled her against his chest and buried his face in her hair as the sun went down gold over the peaks, and said he had lived 5 years certain he had nothing left to lose, and had been wrong, and was grateful past speaking to have been so wrong. And Adeline, who had been sold for a debt that was never hers and driven into the snow to die, lifted her face to the wide and endless azure sky of the untamed West and kissed the man she had healed. The outcast bride who had been traded away like spoiled freight hadn't just survived the frontier, she had conquered it, and won herself a name, a home, and a love no winter could ever freeze. What a breathtaking tale of survival, betrayal, and untamed frontier love. Did you love this Wild West romance? Hit that like button, share this gripping story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical sagas. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Adeline's shoes? alone and freezing on that mountain with nothing but a needle and your own two hands? Hi there, my name is Inslee Rowland, the owner of Frontier Encounters. I keep thinking about the strange arithmetic of kindness on the old frontier, how a single mercy offered with nothing left to give can come back around to save the one who gave it. I'd love to know how this one made you feel. Do you think Adeline trusted Thaddeus the moment she woke to his fire, or did he earn it slowly, stitch by stitch? Let me know down in the comments. I read every one, and I am so glad you came up this mountain with us tonight.